Hello and welcome to this iMesh video. So today we have something quite exciting to talk about, and that's the roof generator. This is going to be mostly a how-to guide on how to use it. So if you have downloaded it, you want to use it, then I'd recommend watching this video. Now, this would not be possible without the help from Kate White. So I'll put a link to her socials in the description. So please do check her out. So thank you very much for all your help. This would not be possible without you. This is months of work that's finally released. This is version 1. I imagine that there's going to be some updates coming along in the future as well. If somebody is subscribed to iMesh, if you're using the asset manager, you'll see update if it's been updated, and new features will probably be continually added. We have been working through as many bugs as we possibly can, but of course there's an infinite variety of different roof types. So if you do find a bug, please do let us know, and we'll try to work on that, and then we can push an update to everybody as well. So I'd recommend reaching out to us on Discord, and from there you'll be able to just talk about the roof generator on there as well. So yeah, if you are interested in getting this roof generator, it's $17. Basically, you get access to iMesh and the whole library, 2,700 assets right now, the full access for $17 per month. So if you're interested, I recommend now is the time to check it out. This tool, this generator on its own probably sell for $50. So let alone this generator on its own plus 2,500 assets. That's pretty crazy. So let's jump into the tutorial and get some roof generators going. Okay, so here is the first roof type, and I'm just going to go through this one and show you how this one's put together. I'm just going to basically work my way through here, and I'll put chapters for each section. So if you do get stuck on something, you could jump straight to that. Okay, so let's work our way through. So show emitter, that's basically, if I go into edit mode, we can see that this is the plane itself. If I was to turn that off, that will basically hide that part. We have face selection. Now, if you see any of these, basically that means that you'll be able to use an attribute. And I'm going to start talking about attributes right at the very beginning, because a lot of these do include attributes. And I understand they may be a little bit confusing, so I'll explain how this works right now. So if I go to Object Data Properties, and then down here we have attributes. And if you don't know what attributes are, they are basically like vertex groups. So if I go into edit mode, I can select this vertex, I can assign it to this one, and then if I click select, that is now assigned. So I can do this one as well, assign, select. Now we can see that these two are selected. So basically that works kind of in the same way with attributes. So I can select an edge, for example, this one, and then I can go to, let me just make that smaller. I can then go to here and then click on add gutters and click set attributes and then click add gutter. And now we can see that a gutter has been added. So that works in various different ways. And now if you go to here, we can see that this icon is showing, and that probably means you can use an attribute for it. So if I click this button here, and then that's now saying face selection, selected faces. So if I press 3, go face select, then I can select this face, for example, and then I can go down to attributes, and then I can look for, if I go for selected faces, I can click F3, set attribute, and now I can deselect that. So now I can turn that off. Now, basically how attributes work, make sure you always have the one you want selected first, then go over to it, click on it, and then do F3, set attribute, and turn it off. So this allows for incredible customizability, and basically as many of these parameters as we can, we've added attributes there. So for example, offset Y, I can click this button. I can then go to this one here, do F3, set attribute, and then I can shift that up. Now you see nothing's happened. That's simply because, let's copy this. If I go to here, there's nothing here. So if I enter that in, off Y, we can now see that that has now changed. Same for here. We could probably set that to be off X. And you can basically call that anything you want, X, blah, 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 blah. And then if I go to attributes, I can then add that in myself. And I'm going to set that to be a face. Okay, and then click OK. Now, if I was to do set attribute, I can then shift that over as well. So you can imagine how much customizability you can do for every single part of this whole roof system. So I'm just going to remove this one, and let's go back to turn that one off. Okay, so let me actually just turn this one off as well. But by default, this is how I want it to look. Now we have offset X, we have offset Y, and we can see that this is always going to be doing it based on the actual tile width. So it's basically going to be snapping to make sure that all the tiles do fit on correctly. Now, if I was to do use UV, we can see everything's gone a little bit wonky, but if I go to the UV editor, and then I can go edit mode, now we can see that every face has its own island. So I can select this one, for example, and then I can just rotate that. So I could do 90 degrees. And now we can see that that has now rotated. Now, if I was to move this over like this, and now we have a lot more fine tuning on how this whole thing is going to be put together. So I can select this face here, rotate that 90 degrees. I can then also shift that over as well if I wanted to. So, but by default, I do think that just using the XY offset is probably going to be easiest. Now, of course, show tiles, that turns them on and off. And then we come to the tiles collection. So let me talk about how the tiles are put together so that you can also do it yourself. So if I go to this collection here, we can see that we have a collection full of tiles. Now, this is basically going to be, if I choose that collection, it's going to be randomizing between all of these tiles. So if I select this face, bring that up, we can see this tile is now randomly scattered over this whole surface, and we can see it now poking through on all of these. So I'm just going to remove all of these ones for now, just so we have one. So one thing that's very important is the origin point is going to be roughly where I want the tile to start overlapping. So we can see here about this much space is here, and then that is about as much distance from here to here. So if I go into edit mode, press A, and then I bring this over like this, we can see that the overlap point is getting closer and closer to that end. So if you have a long tile and you want it to be more stretched out, that's how you basically do it. So let's say you want to have more tiles on there, you can crunch them all up. You can also see that it's starting to overlap, so we can also rotate this like this. Something like that, but this tile doesn't really work in this case, but basically it will look something like that. And now then, if you do want to scale it, so what I'd recommend is doing Shift S, cursor to selected, go to the 3D cursor as the pivot point, and then press A, and then scale that up. So now it's always going to be working perfectly correctly because that origin point I've already put in the right place, and it's basically just going to be at the bottom edge of this tile, and I want it to be scaling from that point. However, if I was to scale it from like the middle, you're going to get slightly different scaling, and you might get some errors in ways which you don't want it to. So we can see now that there is a gap, and that's simply because the origin point is now off of the tile. So we could bring that back and get that back to where it is. So that's basically how tiles work. We've tried to make it as simple as possible. So all you need is a tile, make sure the origin point is somewhere around there, and then you're good to go. The roof generator will do the scattering for you perfectly fine. So let's go next. So we have a tile subdivision. So sometimes you get a tile and you might be having some problems with it. So sometimes, for example, you have the boolean, which is a trim method down here, and sometimes it just doesn't boolean as you'd hope it would. Now, that's where a tile subdivision could come in. Now, you can subdivide it on here if you wanted to, or you can go onto the actual tile itself and add subdivision. But sometimes if there's just some boolean or something that's just not quite right working correctly, like there's just one tile poking out here for no reason, then I'd recommend trying adding like one tile subdivision and see if that fixes it. Because sometimes boolean can be a little bit janky sometimes in Blender, but adding more geometry can sometimes help that. Usually you don't get too much problems if it's mostly just a nice square object, but that is something to take note of. Okay, now we have a seed. So let me just make another one here and just bring that up like this. Right. Now, if I was to go down to here and change the seed, that'll basically change the randomization of that tile. Then we have the tile pattern. So we have half, we also have straight, we also have quarter. So depending on your roof, you might need a different option. And it also depends on the tile itself. So we have certain tiles on some which do not work straight and they do need to be half, for example. So that's that. Now we have overlap as well. So some tiles, let me actually... So if I show you this tile, for example, this tile itself does require some overlap. So that's where the tile overlap comes in. So you can basically push this tile underneath that one, and then that's good to go. So some overlap is required. And then we have height. You can just move it away from the surface. Right, now we have trim method. So first one's none, and that basically means that there's going to be no boolean at all, and it's just going to basically work. This will be pretty fast because there's no extra calculations being done. Now, boolean, I'd recommend, is probably going to be the one that works best most of the time because you can actually see the final result. And then once you've actually got the roof set up, you don't actually need to move it around anymore. Then I'd recommend just setting it to Boolean because I think you'd get the better results that way. But we do also have alpha map. So if you have a very, very big, very complicated roof and you just need some speed, but you also want to do some render previews, this is also very fast. But if I go into render preview, we can see that's now been trimmed. So this is basically using an alpha map onto the actual tile itself to use the alpha map to clip that off. So that, as you can imagine, is actually pretty cool. The fact that it can actually use the alpha map to hide the geometry. So if I go back to solid view, we can see it looks really janky there, but actually it's going to look perfectly fine from this angle. Now, one thing to note, if you go like this, you can see we're going to have lots and lots of overlapping tiles here. So if I go to render preview, and then if I go down, you might start seeing some black edges. We can't actually see it here because I've actually got already my transparent bounces quite high. If you've got it quite low, for example, 5, you can start to see more overlapping faces more obviously. So if I set this to be 1, you're going to start to see these a lot easier. So if you want to set this method, I'd recommend setting quite a high transparent bounces. And it also depends on the angle. Like if you are actually looking directly through all the tiles, that's when you start to see this happening. So if we go like here, that's when we have at least 20 overlapping tiles right now. So that would just require a little bit of fine tuning. But in general, from a general roof angle, I don't think you should have many problems with that. So yes, this trim method, alpha map, very, very cool. And also very, very fast because it's not doing any extra Boolean calculations. And if you're getting quite slow performance, let's say you have a huge roof system and the tiles themselves are quite complicated, then you might need to change the display method to be something like point or bounding box. And I've just realized that points are just not showing, but that will basically just be points. They're not really going to be doing anything. They won't render or anything, but you can also change it to be bounding box if you wanted to, which will take the shape of the actual tile and put a bounding box around it. But I'd recommend geometry is probably going to be perfectly fine. Okay, so now we have enable randomization. So basically we can set the minimum and maximum of the scale, rotation and translation. So if I set the maximum to be 0.01, we can move all the tiles around by about 1 centimeter. And then we can also change the maximum rotation to be like 3 centimeters. And then you can see that we can start to get in some crazy broken roofs. Now, let me actually change this Z to be 0 because I don't really want to move them up, but maybe moving them left and right probably be best. And then we can also change the scale as well. So we can change the minimum scale to be slightly smaller. And now let's make this slightly bigger. And then we get some, it's going to be like a nice broken roof effect. Right then, so that's randomization, and let's turn that back off again. And then we have offset. So let me actually turn it back to Boolean. So we have edge offset, which is like an overall offset. And then we also have offset on the bottom edge. So if you want the tiles to hang down more, you can do that. And then also offset on the sides. So I'm just going to bring that over on the sides like this, and we can see them moving over. But if, for example, let's say you move this over, but you do not want it to be offset on this edge, we also have an attribute here. So it's called remove offset. If I go to edit mode, select this edge here, and then I'm going to look for remove offset, and then press F3, set attribute, and removes offset. And that allows for a lot more fine tuning as well here. Then we have the hip and ridge. So what we have here is we have the ridge as this collection here, and then we also have a cap. So the cap is basically the part that goes on the end. So that will probably be something with a flat edge. Or you can add some other decorative item here, so you can make it like a nice decorative tile to go on the end of these ridges. And then we also have a hip collection. So let me just make a really new square. Let's move this to a new collection called, and click OK. And now if I click on this one, I can then select that collection here. So let's choose that collection. And we can see that has now been added to this object here. So let's go into edit mode. Let's scale this down. Well, let's actually apply the scale and scale that down. So now we can change, because sometimes you have different types of tiles which go on the hips. This is the ridge and this is the hip, I believe, anyway. And how these are laid out. So we can see here there is some overlapping, and that's because it's always going to be on this edge. So we can see that this origin point is not, we can see this origin point is in the center. So let's move this over here so we can see what's going on. So if I go into edit mode and bring this over like this, we can see we're not going to get any overlap now. Now, overlap can sometimes be important. So for example, on this roof type, This particular ridge tile needs to go inside the other one. So that's where some overlap can be important. So I've probably set the origin point to be somewhere like this. And then we also have, again, a different object to be the cap. So if I was to duplicate this, let's just move it to scene collection. Let's just move it to a hip end, oh, almost. And then I'm just going to move this out like this. And then if I set that to be that object, we can see that that's now added onto that end part there. So then, let's just remove these. Okay, and by default, if you don't have them selected, it's just going to be using your hip collection. Right then, and these also have their own parameters. So we have, we can move the height up. We can change the overhang. So as these tiles are overhanging a little bit more, let's just move that out like this. And then we also have some attributes for those as well. So we can remove the ridge from here if we wanted to, or reverse the direction. Right, then we have fascia and soffit. I believe that's how you meant to say it, but that's basically this part at the bottom. So if I turn that off, it's just going to be the basic roof, but generally most of them do have something like this. So we have that here, and let's work our way down. So we have the height, and we have the depth, and we also have a material. So in this case, I think I've added a wood material to go on the edge here, and that's just going to be nicely unwrapped and placed on this edge. But this can be anything you like. You could choose that material. And then we have the soffit itself. So that's this piece underneath. And we can change the depth. And there's also like additional height here. So if there's a little gap here, you can increase the height here. There we go. And it also depends on the geometry of your actual building as well. You might need some additional height in that case. And then we have this soffit, and that's going to be this part here. So that's going to be this material as well. And for this actual part, that's actually going to be some geometry itself. So that's this piece here. So if I go to this object, that's just going to be this basic plank shape. Now, if I go to here, that is the plank that has been enabled here. So if I turn that off, we're not going to get any geometry there. Now, you don't always need geometry in this part, but sometimes there is some sort of detail or some sort of like grill or something on the bottom part there. So if you do need it, that's what you can choose there. So I'm just going to choose soffit. And these planks get put there. Now you can also adjust the widths and some basic parameters of these planks as well. Right then, so now let's move on to the valley, and that's basically this part here. So sometimes there's going to be an edge, and that's where the rain is going to fall. It's going to fall down the valley and then get put into the gutter. So we have this option here, and of course you can set an attribute as well. So we can just call this one anything we like. So valley width, and then if I go to here, I can then add that one in here as well. So valley width. And I'm going to say it's going to be for an edge, and it's going to be a float. Float basically means like we can choose a range of values. So if I press tab, let's go to edit mode, let's select this edge. I'm going to make sure I'm on valley width, set an attribute, and then we can increase that there. So if you do have a roof that's quite complicated and you do need different widths for different valleys, then you can create your own attribute there as well. So let's just turn this one back off, because by default, usually they'll always be very similar. And then we also have add valley and remove valley as attributes already exposed. So if you do want to just simply remove it, we can go to here, we can find remove valley and do set attribute. We can then remove that if we wanted to. Right then, and then we have flashing. And that's basically this basically edge which goes around a hole in the ceiling. So this is where a window will be placed, and you may get something that looks like this. If I turn that off, it might go a little bit wonky because it's trying to make a soffit there, but it shouldn't be. So I'm just going to go set attribute. I'm going to select all of these edges, and then I'm going to go add flashing and make that to be add flashing. So if I go back to flashing, so we can turn that off, turn that on, and we basically just have a bunch of different parameters for that. Right then. And then we also have a separate material for that one as well, if you wanted to. And then we get on to gutters. So these ones are pretty cool. I love that these are included in it because every roof generally has a gutter. So, and we also released some gutters on iMesh as well. They are actually going to be updated to be improved performance. But we have taken that improved performance one and actually put it on this roof system already, so you don't need to worry about those. But basically, they will come as quite a big set of collections because they're quite complicated on their own. We are going to rename these to be vertical, horizontal, so we actually know which one we're adjusting, because there's a horizontal one and a vertical one that requires slightly different parts. And if you do have an iMesh subscription, of course, you can download some other gutters and add those in yourself if you wanted to. But basically, if I go to the gutter collection here, basically, these are all the parts that are being used, and they're just going to be scattered throughout this whole system. So let me show you how this works. Again, I think I've already shown you can add gutters or remove gutters by using attributes. So let's set this face and let's find add gutters. Let's turn it off for this one. Right, so we just want a gutter here for some reason. And then we have this vertical pipe. Now, this vertical pipe is very simple. All you need is some geometry, which is not connected to anything, like this. And what's going to happen is that this is going to automatically try to snap to the horizontal part. So if I move that over there, we can see that's already snapping, which is amazing. So if I bring this one over here, it's going to snap to these parts and something like that. So this probably isn't going to be used in this case, but let's move this over here and we can see it's all automatically rotated, and that's going to be working. So we can adjust this, and let's say you probably want something like this shape. Oops. You probably want something like this. As it will be going down that part like that. So that's probably how it will look. And okay, and we also have certain things like we have over here, we have the, let me actually adjust the height. So let's remove this away. Let me actually just, because I can see in this case, this is overhanging too far. So I'm going to go to edge, select this one, and I'm going to choose overhang. I'm going to click this button and I can set that to be an attribute. So ridge overhang, copy that. Oh, there we go. So now if I go to edit mode, ridge overhang, set attribute, I can adjust this. I can adjust this manually on this side compared to the rest. But anyway, let's go back to this gutter. So what we have here is the gutter, and we have the fillet radius, and that is basically this piece here. So you can make it more rounded if you wanted to. Of course, you then need to move it away from the wall a little bit, but that will also affect it in this part here. So if I bring the gutter back on this part, add gutters, set attribute, add gutter. So we can see it's also going to be affecting this part. So if I go here and adjust the radius here, this part works a little bit better, but there we go. So now we have, and then we also have fillet radius. That's why I said, I think we're going to rename this to be, for example, vertical fillet radius. So that's going to be affecting this part. So I can adjust this. Something like that. Okay, and now for the vertical supports, so these sections here which attach to the wall, because we don't know exactly where the wall is going to be, we'll be using a vertex group. So if I go into object data properties, and then I go to here, I'm going to name one. It's just going to be called supports. Now we are going to be updating it right now to remove this underscore. So you just want to write supports. And then what will happen is if I go into edit mode, if I then go and add some more vertices, if I assign these vertices to this vertex group, then we can see the supports are added. So I can move these up and down as we like. And also you can go to the surface and we can select, for example, the wall, and it should extrude the parts. If they're not quite touching, it will extrude the last face to that wall. Now, when you add these, to the wall, I would recommend you do actually just make the geometry touch the wall, because that's how it will be in real life. But just in case, they will extrude to the wall. Then we have the snow guard. So if I just click show, we can see we have snow guards added. Now we have two different types that I believe will be sent in this. So if I go to type, basically this is going to be choosing the snow guard collection, and there is a few different things in there. So with this variation, this is basically randomizing through these, cycling through them. And with this one selected, this one is mainly made for a rail. So if I go down to rail curve, I can just type in rail, and there should be a snow rail profile. and then that's going to add a rail through that. So usually there's probably only going to be one row. So let's just reduce that. Okay, so usually you just have a one going along the bottom, but that's automatically added a nice snow guard along the bottom. And but in some cases you might just want these little clips. And let me just turn this back off again, and you can then just increase the rows, and then you can offset the columns, something like that. And you basically move these up or down as well. Now, usually these clips, these will go basically sit underneath. So you can adjust slightly where these do go. And you can basically fine tune these a little bit if you wanted to. So, but in this case, it should just work. I have created these presets in this case to just work, but if your roof is maybe steeper than another, you may need to change some things slightly. But that's basically snow guards. Now let's go to culling. So this one's very exciting. So let me add in a camera here. And let me just move this camera out of the ridge collection. There we go. So now if I go to this roof generator and I go down to culling, I can enable camera culling. So I can go into the camera view and we can see there's some on the edge here, which you'll be able to see there's a gap. So you can expand the camera view like this. Okay, so now let's say that you have this camera and you realize, well, all of these tiles are being calculated, but we're never going to see them. So that's just adding to VRAM that you don't need. So with this object selected, I can go down to culling and I can enable self-culling. And then what that's done is that has now hidden all the tiles on the faces which we can't see, which that could be quite useful. If some tiles are being removed that you don't want them to, I would recommend just turn that back on again. Right then, and now we have show moss under texture, and that's basically just going to be adding moss to the object. So if I go to render preview, we can see that it's going to be adding moss into these areas. So it will start adding moss where you'd imagine the moss would go. So like in the crevices of these or in the gaps. Let me go to a better looking one. Okay, so this roof type is really good for the moss. So if I go into render preview, basically what it will be doing, it will be using the height of the actual roof tile first. So as you can imagine, the parts which are going to be more exposed to the rain will be more softer. There's also ambient occlusion baked into this. So some of these edges will be getting the moss first. So if I slowly start bringing this out, you'll be able to slowly see more and more moss being added. And also this area here is getting more moss than the rest. So if I go to 0.15, we can see that the moss is starting to be added in these crevices first. That's also being used, that's also done with ambient occlusion as well. So that's basically just how you'd imagine moss would react. Now let me bring this to be 0.55. And we can start to see a really, really nice, realistic roof tile. Now you'd imagine this with some randomization to the tiles could be really nice. But this to me is starting to look already quite photorealistic simply by adding some moss to this part. Now then, we can also see that moss is being added to the gutters as well. And these parts, this is going to be fixed. Don't worry about that. This is not unwrapped correctly, but that is going to be fixed. And yeah, this moss, great effect. We also have snow, which we'd like to add. However, due to time constraints, this one is paused, but it's basically the same as moss, where the snow gets built up, and then eventually it's going to be like a layer of snow, but it will be done with a texture. I am considering doing it with actual geometry, but that is a little bit more complicated, so we'll get onto that a little bit later. Okay, now let's talk about the metal panels. Now these do work in very similar ways, but there's a couple of slight differences. So the roof panel itself is just going to be a profile. So I have selected this profile collection, which is going to be all of these profiles in here. So if I bring this one up, we can see, let's actually select these ones, bring these up like this. We can see that it's going to be cycling through them evenly. So you can create any profile shape that you like. So if I just, let's remove this one. And then I can select this one. And let's just subdivide this a few times. And then I could just create any type of roof shape that I like. So I have created a bunch of different variations of that. Some of the most common ones, most common shapes that you'd find. So some corrugated ones, some flat ones, or some which are, for example, on like a copper roof type. And basically these are just going to be the profiles. So now it's also important that if you do create a variety of profiles, that they are the same length. And usually it will start from this one endpoint. So if you move this over, that's how it's going to be moving across. Now there are some slightly different parts. There's not going to be a ridge type or like individual collection for these, because usually they are just like a flat metal object. So we have this drip edge here. This is basically like a piece of metal that comes down the front. So it comes down here, then down the front of here. So it's called a drip edge. Let me actually turn off the gutter. You better see it then. It's basically this piece here. And we can adjust the height here, so we can make sure that it maybe matches this edge. That'd be quite nice. Right then we also have a dry verge. So this is this piece here, and that's going to be going along this edge. We can add some thickness here if we wanted to, and we can also offset that as well. So sometimes they do just have an open edge. So we have add cap, and we also have close cap, and because that's basically going to be filling the geometry in. So if I turn this off, we can see that this is now hollow inside, but you can fill it in if you needed to. So a bunch of different parameters there. The hip, like I said, and the ridge is just going to be some geometry. So we can adjust the widths here, and the thickness, and the overhang. And again, there's some attributes, so you can remove them if you wanted to. Now, sometimes there is going to be a gap under here, and sometimes it's nice just to close it off. So you can close this gap if you wanted to. So we can move this like something like this. Yes, so there we go. So that looks quite nice. And then we also have the fascia soffit. That's going to be working the same as the other one. Same for the valley. And the flashing also is going to work in the same for gutter and snow guard. So snow guard, I've found with the metal panel roofs, generally they always seem to have this type of railing that goes across. So we can see here there's a bit of gap between these panels. And that's because this is going to be using the location of the first panel to offset and choose where it should go. So you can adjust the horizontal and add some more in there, but it is always going to be trying to avoid these edges. And if there's no space for one of these elements, then it's not going to add the pipe, because the pipe's going to be going to nothing. So you can also remove the delete near edge, and then one of these has appeared, so the pipe has now been added there as well. But what is also quite common in a metal panel roof is to have some bolts. So as well as the roof snow guards, so we do have these ones as well if you wanted to, but we also have bolts, and this is also going to be a simple collection. So we have bolts, bolts single. So let's go to see what this looks like. This is just basically these bolts here. We also have these ones as well. So sometimes you have double bolts, sometimes you have single bolts. So what I have done is if I go back to this object here, I've basically said that I want to use the double bolts collection. So that's going to be randomizing between these. And in each of these is going to be at different variations. You're going to have different colors. You can change these to be different shapes. So you can cycle through them if you wanted to. I can also choose bolt single, and that's going to be a single type there as well. Now we have different ways in which we can scatter these. So we can reduce the width, but then they stop here. So you maybe want to add some more rows. And we also can change how frequently they appear, and also the distance away. And basically you have full customizability here, and you can add the bolts. Now I do recommend, if you have a roof panel, that you add these bolts, because I do feel like all these small details is what makes it look very realistic. So I recommend that. And then again, we have the moss. Now, like I said, this snow is not going to be included in this release. We might have an update a little bit later, simply lack of time, so that's going to be removed. But that's basically how the roof panel works as well. So this is just like it works just like the same as the roof tiles. So any kind of roof shape that you want should be possible. Okay, now for the final thing, we're going to show you how to paint directly onto the tiles. Now, as the tiles each have their own UV map, we'll be using the UV map from the whole surface, so that we can add any type of material anywhere on this roof. So the first thing I need to do is I need to make sure I have overwrite UV map and realize instances enabled. Then I'm going to make a new material. So this is basically the old material, and then I'm going to make a new material. So let's say I want to have it a metallic red, for example, and wherever I paint, I want it to be this new material. So you can imagine you can paint your own moss or grime or something like that on there. So I'm going to make a new texture called painting, and I'm going to make new image. We can then go to painting here, and we can see this here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to texture paint. Then I go to here and make sure I have it set to single image, not material. And then I'm going to find painting. Okay, now with painting selected, and we can see basically the UV map unwrap for this whole surface. And now I can just start painting on here. So just for like this, I can do a smiley face if I wanted to. Okay, and then that's created that mask. So now if I come back of like object mode, and then I'm just going to make sure to turn these back off. And then I'm going to make sure roof data node group, and we're going to use surface UV. Surface UV is referring to this whole big surface, not just the individual tiles. So I'm going to put that surface UV into this map. And then if I click render, we can now see that where I've painted has now shown up here. So I go around the back, and now we can see the texture paint has now appeared there correctly. So you can create any material like there. If you're good at texture painting, you can paint a lot more complex things if you wanted to. And then also make sure you add that same mask to these other objects as well, and then that'll get painted on. Okay, and while I'm still here, let me just talk you through this roof data. So whenever you import this whole object, you'll get this roof data panel. So this is basically a way in which you can customize things a bit further. So if I go cycle through them, we can see we have random per surface. We have a bunch of other things. So this is surface UV, as I mentioned. We've got height factor as well. So depending on how far away the tile is from the surface. And we also have a bunch of other options. And the snow ones are not going to be available right now, but we have proximity to edge as well. And trim method, this is going to be used for the UVs, for the alpha. And the same for this one as well. So this is just a few more extra customizations that you can use for creating interesting textures as well. And also, if something on here is not working quite as you'd hoped, you wanted something to be a little bit different, what you can do is click Realize Instances, and then you just click Apply or Control A, and you can apply that whole thing. It will unfortunately make all the geometry, so that will all count to VRAM. However, you can now edit everything in here. So you can perfectly tweak it how you'd like. I mean, this whole thing is only 200,000 faces, which actually isn't that bad. So yeah, if you wanted to apply it, just remember to click Realize Instances. Okay, and that's basically the roof generator. I hope that you've enjoyed that. If you are looking to get your hands on this and over 2,500 other assets, then do sign up to iMesh. It's only $17 per month right now. So you can't get a better deal, I don't believe, than that. If you do have any problems with this roof generator, then please do go on to Discord and let us know, and I'm sure we can try to fix that. But like I said, there's infinite amount of types of roofs and configurations and shapes that I'm sure there's some parts which are not going to work 100%. This is version 1, of course, as well. But the more people let us know about bugs, the sooner we can patch them and send them to everybody else. So, but from what I've tested, it's worked on a bunch of different roof shapes, and I'm really happy with how it's turned out. If there's anything that you'd like to see on iMesh, any more Geometry Node systems, then do let us know and we'll see what we can do. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.